This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Headscarves and Good Yarns with me, Amal. The show is all about talking about race, diversity and everything in between, all in the hopes of empowering a more empathetic Aotearoa. We talk about all these huge life things through the lens of people's lives and stories. I hope every yarn you take a wee gem from it and expands your heart and mind just a wee bit more. Kia ora, welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. Today we're going to be getting into a juicy topic, and just a disclaimer, it might be a bit sensitive to talk about. It is going to be a little bit uncomfortable because we are talking about race, but I think we really need to talk about race, especially in this current social political climate where it just seems like, I don't know, progress seems like it's going backwards a little bit. It really does seem like that. And also another disclaimer that I want to put out there, most of this episode is going to be, you know, mainly my 2 cents and my analysis. And, you know, I am a black hijabi woman, but I'm only one black hijabi woman, and I cannot speak for the whole community. So I think, you know, think of that disclaimer like salt. So you never want to oversalt your food. You always just want to take a pinch. So please just take a pinch as you're listening to this episode. But this episode we're going to be unpacking this like colorblind versus like hyper awareness on race that I seem to observe a lot these days. Like it's really strange. Really strange the contrast between the two, because on one end, you know, there's this advocacy or motivation to, you know, see the world colorblind in this, like, you know, giving this false sense of equality. But then on the other hand, you have your race being the focal point and something that is a vehicle for all these assumptions and unfortunately a justification for some really ugly behavior. And the contrast between the two in this current social and political climate is very interesting. And I think, as with most episodes on this show, it's the seed for the episode is always kind of planted through what I'm observing or experiencing in my own personal life. And I think as of late, there have just been a lot of things that I've noticed, whether it's been like actually in person or in the online space, that have made me just think about this contrast between, you know, hyper focus on race and this color blindness. You know, the thing that immediately comes to mind is I just recently watched Sinners, and y'all, that is the movie of the year. I know we're only in May, and I don't know what other movie is going to come out this year, but I'm telling you now that is the movie of the year. Y'all all need to watch it. I will be doing a Sinners specific episode in a couple of episodes time, because there was so much to unpack. There was a lot of it gave me lots of food for thought, and I really want to unpack it on the show. But anyways, I go on a side tangent. But yeah, I watched Sinners, and the director for Sinners was Ryan Coogler. I'm pretty sure I said his name correctly. But he was the one who directed Black Panther. And I know he's done lots of other movies, but Sinners and Black Panther just immediately come to mind. And when I become obsessed with something, I'm like, let me watch every interview that has ever happened. Let me get as much intel as I can. Like, let me just eat up this movie even more. And there were a lot of, I think Ryan Coogler is celebrated for being an amazing director. But I noticed that, every single time he was introduced or described, it was always like black director. And there's this one particular interview that really stood out to me, and it was Ryan himself saying, like, I was, celebrated for Black Panther and was celebrated as, like, the highest grossing film with a black director, or something along those lines, and then he goes on to say in that interview, well, actually it was like the highest grossing film of that year, and that part is never spoken about. It's always the fact that I'm, it's always centered on my blackness, but actually it was just a great film that did great on its own merit as well. And, I get that. And I think I don't want to diminish what Ryan is saying, because in this current social political climate that we're living in, and I'm not just talking about overseas when I say this, like, this is happening here in Aotearoa with initiatives from or policies being proposed as of late that want to move away from quote unquote woke policies and focus on all New Zealanders, which that in itself is problematic, and I think that could be its own podcast episode on its own, but hopefully I can speak to a bit of that in this episode. But I thought that was really interesting that Ryan himself had made, had spoken that observation, because it is really interesting that, whenever Ryan Coogler is mentioned or talking about the success of his films, it's that focus on the fact that he is, the first black director to, XYZ. But if you actually take away the fact that he's black, his films are just amazing anyway. Like, they've just outperformed and done really well. So I thought that was really interesting. And then you kind of have not the other end of the spectrum, but hyper focus on race in a different way. And this is just videos that I've seen online, and I feel like the past year, maybe 2 years, I don't know, I've just noticed a trend of, like, more videos on the internet circulating of incidents like this, and it's just like the most ugly forms of really racist behavior, where again there's this like weird hyper focus on race. Like, for example, I saw 2 videos just this morning, in fact, and again, it's a video, it doesn't explain the full story, but I just don't understand what could even justify such ugly behavior, regardless of what happened beforehand. There was one video where a grown ass woman has called a little child the N-word. Again, I don't know what had happened up until that point, but to even say that to a child is just like, there's just no justification for behavior like that at all. And I'm assuming the video was recorded by, either the parent or auntie or uncle or just someone who was with the child at the time. And in the video, she's just like, really shows no remorse, does not care that they've said that word. It's a bit wild. And then I saw another video where a black man was pushed off. Oh, wait, let's rewind back to the woman, because I didn't actually go ahead and verify this, but apparently, and there were a lot of comments where people were highlighting the fact that this woman had like something like a GoFundMe in the name of protecting white families, and it had actually amassed a lot of money, like 6 digits, a lot of money, which is wild. Again, I did not go any further from the comments to actually go ahead and verify this, but if that is true, wild, because who really needs that protection is that poor child that was who was on the receiving end of hate speech. But anyways, back to the other video that I saw. Again, I don't know what had happened beforehand, but again, I don't know what kind, like, it doesn't really matter what happened beforehand, because I don't know what justifies behavior like this. But from the comments, it sounded like, there was a dispute over the dogs. But it was like a black man in a wheelchair with his dogs. His dogs are muzzled up. Again, I don't know what happened up until this point, but the neighbors had come and pushed him out of his wheelchair, and one of the neighbors, it seemed like, was recording, and some other neighbors had stepped in as well, but just like really like ugly behavior. And this is just today. I feel like it's quite often that I'll see videos like this, and again, racism has been alive and kicking for a really, really long time, but I think with this social and political climate that we're living in, when you see videos like this and you hear of instances like this, I don't know, to me it's a little bit scary, because personally, it was, growing up when I was younger, there were a lot of really, really quite ugly racist behaviors that I would be on the receiving end of, from like kids my age, but also from adults as well. But I feel like I haven't actually experienced behavior like that in quite a long time. But I think for me, I'm just like, if it were to happen, I honestly wouldn't be surprised. But it was wild, y'all. Like, I remember, and bear in mind, I am like a child at this point, but I just remember like adults coming up to me and just saying really awful things, saying the N-word, or like asking me if I had a bomb in my bag or a bomb on my person. It was a really strange time. I haven't, personally, I haven't experienced incidences like that in a really long time, but I don't know, I just think with the rise of seeing videos like that, and then just anecdotally just hearing stories that have happened in the community as well, I'm like, oh, we're heading into really slightly strange and scary times a little bit. So yeah, it's strange, this contrast of like this weird hyper focus on race in the instances that I've just spoken about, whether it is in a quote unquote positive light with Ryan Coogler, or in a very like ugly behavior, racist way that I've highlighted in the videos that I've just even seen just this morning. But then you contrast that with this talk of like, it's very much giving all lives matter. And then just the overall vibes of all lives matter that is kind of coming through, especially in our policy. And I think even though the Treaty Principles Bill was voted against in its second reading, so it technically failed, it has started this whole conversation about many things, but one really big thread of the conversation is about, race here in Aotearoa, like our race relations. And there's a lot of, I think, misinformed and ignorant conversations and thoughts that are circulating, about how we need to be colorblind, and seeing those like personal thoughts translate into like political policy is really interesting. And I think this is a really meaty puzzle piece, but the last meaty puzzle piece that this leads me to in this episode is Tyler Harper wrote this article in the Atlantic, and it was basically about this contrast that I've been highlighting about colorblindness, blah blah blah, in the political sphere versus the personal sphere, and just learning how to navigate that, I suppose. And so if you wanted to read the article for yourself, the article is called The Problem with Centering Blackness in Everyday Conversations. And there's a really key thesis point in there that I'm like, let's unpack that. Let's talk about that. And so what Tyler is basically arguing is that blindness as a political policy, so like in the political world, is known to be racist. I think in the article Homeboy says historically, but I think we can look at our world as it is right now and know that that is very much well and alive, and it's not contained in just our history books, unfortunately. And so, there's a very valid argument to, color blindness political policies or race-neutral political policies. They are deeply flawed, even though it's giving equality for all. But Tyler is arguing that the same probably cannot be argued about color blindness as a personal ethos. And when he said personal ethos, the way that I'm understanding it is like the way that you personally look at the world. So Tyler's saying that in our day-to-day lives, that color blindness should be the norm. And I think it sounds strange, right? Because just like how colorblind political policies are giving, it's giving racist paru vibes, It kind of sounds like in your day-to-day, colorblindness should be the norm. I don't know. It doesn't sound right. But I think the argument there is pretty solid and pretty interesting. I think it's a little bit of a black and white thinking that's going on, but we can get to that in a little bit. And I think another reason that it sounds kind of strange saying that out loud is that just when it comes to any kind of activism or social justice, it very much most of the time is you are 100% in, or you 100, like, if you're going to be in, you're 100% in. Like, it's an all or nothing type of thing. And I think especially when it comes to race, if that is going to be the case, that you're all in, then you're seeing race everywhere in your life. And so it does sound strange. I think that's another reason why it sounds strange when that argument is made that day-to-day colourblindness should be the norm. It does sound strange. I will acknowledge that. But y'all, even though you're listening to my voice, I'm reaching my hand out. We are in this together. Let's unpack this argument together. And so in the article, Tyler talks about like his personal experience of being caught off guard when there's just like a weird hyper-focus on the fact that he is black. And so there's like strange / clumsy / awkward efforts to be racially sensitive. Like, for example, you're at work, it's like the cooler, you're standing next to the water cooler. I don't know, maybe you're making your cup of tea, you're doing that real cute small talk, talking about what y'all were up to over the weekend, how are the kids, how's the family, what TV show are you watching at the moment, what memes made you go ha ha, you're just having that small talk, right? And then the colleagues make a real hard pivot during this small talk to like acknowledge Tyler's blackness, and then to give space for him to talk about being a black man and the hardships that are associated with that. And it's like, I thought we were all just here to talk about the memes and talk about the TV shows and talk about our weekends. And so there's this like fixation on his race, and there's that wish there to just go about his life. And when I read this part, it just made me think of Ryan Coogler's words again about how sometimes, or just like, highlighting the fact that people forget that, Black Panther was just the highest grossing film regardless, not because of the fact that he was a black director and he had the highest grossing film as a black director. He just had the highest grossing film, period. But there's this hyperfixation on his race, and Tyler also highlights that in his article when he's talking about his own personal experiences. And, in the article, Tyler says, people kept seeing my race and assuming things about me, quote unquote, seeing my race and putting me into racial stereotypes, seeing my race and seeing me nothing more than my race. And this is, I think, something that I personally have noticed in my life too. And so when Tyler brought this up in his article, I was like, oh, interesting. Someone needs to do some research on that. I'm sure there's already research out there. But in the article, Tyler was saying that this is something that he sees, not just in that, negative context or context where you see really ugly racist behaviors, like in the videos that I spoke about at the beginning of this episode, but you also see it in like, for lack of a better word, like positive context as well, and especially in progressive places. And this is something that I've also noticed or experienced in my life too, just like this hyperfixated seeing my race. And this happens a lot, in progressive spaces. And so maybe there's like, too much colour or race conscience. And again, I just want to go back to the disclaimer that I had at the episode that this is going to be maybe a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, but, I'm not assuming that people have ill intent when it comes to behaviour like this. Is usually like well-meaning people, especially in the progressive spaces, but it's when it's that hyperfixation, then, unintentionally you're making race matter more than it really should. And sometimes it feels like when someone's looking at you as a person, it's like race first and then everything comes afterwards. It's like, yes, I'm black, but I'm also Amal. And again, I'm not saying that seeing race is a bad thing, because I can understand that I'm saying this, and it's like, so Amal, what are you trying to say? Like, if that is the case, then it seems like colourblindness is what you're advocating for, and that is not the case at all, okay? The world that we live in is a bit cooked. The systems that we all engage with in a day-to-day life, these systems exist because they come at the cost. And who is paying that? The people who are disadvantaged by the system. And so seeing race or seeing certain parts of people's identity or seeing particular communities is an important thing. It is a positive thing. And it is needed. That's at the end of the day, with the, positive, yes, it is a positive thing, but more importantly, it is still needed because we're still living and existing in these systems where certain communities are paying that price. Exactly like when any ism is at play, it's needed that you see and call it for what it is. But I think what Tyler's article was saying is that when there's too much a hyper focus on race, then it can kind of lead to its own particular type of stereotyping and racism. And even if you don't want to call it, you don't want to use those words, it still can lead to its own particular kind of restriction. And I know I keep going back to the Ryan Coogler thing, but it's just such a great example of what I'm trying to talk about. And I think what Ryan is, again, I ain't Ryan, so I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but if you think about what he said, there's this restriction that's put on him. Like, his greatness can only be defined through his blackness, when Homeboy is just great. His movies, the numbers speak for themselves. And I think that's at the core of it. What privilege allows you is it allows you to have this fullness and your expression of your humanness, essentially. And whatever context it is in, whether it's a positive thing or in the negative context, when you don't have that freedom that privilege allows, your identity, your humanity is always being restricted. You're never seen as a full thing. And this can be, this can come up in many forms. For example, I feel comfortable only speaking for myself. I know I've mentioned, the not so cool videos before. But when it comes to this, I feel like I can only 100% speak for myself. And, you know, in the times that I have been on the receiving end of hate speech or just real ugly racist behavior, there's been that restriction there of my humanity. Or, you know, and if I go to the other end of the spectrum where I have been in, like, I'm not saying this always happens in progressive spaces, but it just more often than not, that is what tends to happen. But, you know, even in the positive context, there's still that restriction on me because it's like I'm being celebrated for my blackness, through my blackness, but I would prefer it if I was just acknowledged for just being Amal. And yes, being black, being a woman of color is a really important part of my experience. I cannot ever separate that from Amal, but I'm still Amal, and there's many other things about me as well, and I think that's what it is that even if it's done in a positive way, like if there is this hyper focus on race, it can lead to its own stereotyping, but ultimately it just leads to its own restriction on humanity. And I think that is how these systems keep progressing. And so then Tyler goes on to say that, you know, there's this push to see race in our personal relationships, but it doesn't actually make race relations any better, but it often, you know, can do has the opposite effect of like just making these interactions like weird or stressful or unpleasant. I feel like you can fill in a myriad of words there. And so I think Tyler in his article is kind of advocating for a balanced approach. So that's color conscious to see the race, factor and why it's needed that we keep advocating, but also colorblind enough to like avoid the effects that come from the hyper fixation. And you know what? I understand like the overall kaupapa of like anti-racism is that, you know, it will get to the point that race will, you know, one day have no bearing on our lives, that, you know, we'll live in a world where there's, whether it's race or just any kind of ism, I think there's so many, you know, we are specifically talking about race in this episode, but it can apply to so many other things, because there are so many communities and identities that are not afforded their full humanity. So there, you know, you can sub in that word race for many other things. I just want to put that out there. You know, that race will just have no limitations or mean anything. Just kind of like, it's just a neutral way of describing how someone be. And so I understand that overall kaupapa of anti-racism, but I think in the world that we're living in now, it is, it's not the full solution, because if that was the case, these colorblind or like race neutral political policies that are coming through are very scary in the sense that they do not help dismantle the system that has, you know, that has helped create the environments that we're all living in now. In fact, those type of policies will just reinforce the system as it exists. And so I don't know if we'll have all of the solutions in anti-racism, but I think part of the solution is from adapting a colorblind, oh my gosh, my words today, y'all. But adopting that color blindness in our personal lives, but politically, we need to keep showing up. We need to keep showing up when it comes to representation, because, I agree and I see what Tyler is saying, but I think that what Tyler is saying is assuming that we see race in some kind of binary, where it's either you see it or you don't. But real life doesn't really work like that. It's way more complicated, and it's not like you can just kind of switch between not seeing race at all or seeing it. And I think maybe if we want to take a more nuanced approach, I think, instead of a hyper focus, I think a soft focus would be what we're leveling up towards, a soft focus. Because when we think about progress, or when we think about working towards living in a world where race it's just a neutral factor, I think there's something to be said there for a colour conscious public policy combined with a colourblind personal policy. And I think I've spoken a lot about the personal, quote unquote, personal policy this episode. I haven't spoken a lot about the public policy. And again, this could honestly be a podcast episode in its own. But I think, when I think about these proposed new policies about that, advocate for colorblindness, which is honestly, it's a little bit wild. It's a little bit, I don't know, scary to just even see like policies like that being, policies like that even being proposed. Like I think the most recent one that has been proposed by ACT is one about education and like removing just like removing race essentially, and just saying like, race has no role in education, which is scary because stats show that there are disproportionate, there are communities that have disproportionate effects and stats, and there's something that needs to be done about that, and that something needs to be in our policies. It needs to be changed in our structure. It's, actually terrifying. Okay, so I've just quickly pulled it up, y'all. So, Dr. Parmjit Parma, an ACT MP, has drafted a members' bill she says would ensure universities do not allocate resources, benefits, or opportunities based on race. And so this has been happening. So this follows on from a cabinet directive last year to create a colourblind public service, which Nicola Willis, she holds many hats, but one of them is the public service minister. Nicola Willis said was a direct result of the coalition agreement National had with ACT to form the government, which is insane. So the drafted bill is called Education and Training Equal Treatment Amendment Bill. So if passed, would effectively apply the Need Not Race Directive to the university sectors. So, changes like this would prevent institutions from giving scholarships based on a person or group's race or ethnic origin, which is insane. Yeah, which is actually insane. And so this is happening here in Aotearoa, but I think you also see it a lot in Trump America right now. It's insane how, people are... I've just seen some videos where people have been surprised by what Trump is doing. It's like, I know some of y'all surprised people voted for him, and it just very much shows that, everything is political. And I think because everything is political, this, anti-race or, race blindness policy is actually terrifying, because everything is political. And if everything is political, we need to have politics that reflect the diversity that we live in. We need policies that will allow all communities to thrive. So that's why this anti-race policies are slightly terrifying, because it kind of gives the impression that there's equality for everyone, but what we actually really need is equity. We need to be raising certain communities, and so they're not living in a disadvantaged by the system. And for everyone who, I know there's people out there who are like, well, why is everything so focused on race? And this is so multi-layered, this whole conversation, but we already live in a racialized world, and if it's something that you're not aware of, or it doesn't affect your day-to-day life, then that's the comfort of privilege cushioning you from that fact. We are already living in a racialized world. Race is very much well and alive. It's not something that is just all of a sudden a big issue, and that's just something we need to dismiss, because that actually minimizes the very valid and very real struggles that communities have been experiencing for such a long time. This has been, you just open up any history book at any time period, race will somehow be relevant, because race is most often used as a justification to to enforce systems, or to have some, be the justification for some really ugly racist behavior. We already be living in a racialized world. And so, our relationship with race, I think, is really important to keep on exploring, to keep on reassessing, to keep on learning, because race will always be relevant politically. Race will always be there, but I think we need to learn how to navigate it, and learn when it needs to be a focus and when it doesn't need to be a focus. I think, going back to Tyler's article, there are some really valid points brought up there. But I think one of the assumptions with this article is that you are living in this binary where you see race or you don't. But I think actually what we need to all be developing is that skill of understanding when race is going to be relevant and when it isn't. It is, not so relevant when you're having that small chat in the office. That's not the time to be making space or holding space for the black guy in the office. We're all just humans. We're all out here talking about our weekends, which most of the time we're doing the similar stuff, right? Chores need to be done, groceries need to be bought, clothes need to be washed. You know what I mean? We're not all too different from that aspect. But there are times where it is really important to talk about, and I think we need to learn when that is collectively. But I think to learn how to do that, it's not easy. You have to understand your privilege or your lack thereof. Learn how to move through that, the heavy emotions associated with that, right? The fragility, the guilt, the shame, whatever it may be. But I just don't think collectively we have those skills to be having really productive conversations just yet. And I think, all of the kōrero around the Treaty Principles Act have just proven that to me, that collectively not everyone is having, has those skills to be having productive conversations. But we need to be able to have those productive conversations. And I hope this episode has been helpful in that. Thank you for tuning into another episode, and we'll catch you the next time.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.